I'm just gonna say at the top of this video that it is going to be exclusively my negative thoughts about Arcane Season 3. There are a lot of things that I did really like in this act, but I'm not going to be talking about any of them. I'm instead just going to be talking about the way that Vi, Jinx, and Ekko stories all fell flat for me at the very last minute. So if you're not in the mood for that kind of negativity, this wouldn't be the video for you. But of course, all my typical disclaimers apply. I don't play League of Legends. This is also just a rambling video with no points. And of course, my prediction bingo card is at the end. Let's go. My first problem with the way this series ended some of its character stories was, of course, with Vi. My biggest problem with Vi was that she didn't change as a character in any sort of meaningful way. When we meet her again after the time skip in Season 1, she's still stuck in a time in the past that no longer exists, which makes sense. She was imprisoned as a child after one of the most traumatic events of her life, meaning she was never able to fully grieve the impact that that loss had on her life. We see time and time again that once she's out, she's unable to accept these changes. Most significantly, she can't accept that Jinx, her sister, has changed, to the point that this season she declares that her sister is dead and tries to kill Jinx in an attempt to move on. So I think it makes a lot of sense that I and a lot of viewers thought that this was going to be the journey that Vi was going to undertake over the course of this series. She has to accept that the events of her past have irrevocably changed what could have been, but that doesn't mean there's nothing left for her. There's still things standing in front of her. With the barrier of the past blocking her view of the present, she can't see the new connections she could forge with Jinx. She doesn't even think to stay and help Ekko and the Firelights because she's trying to once more attain something that no longer exists and never will again. We, as the viewers, want to see her fully see and grieve everything she's lost. It was a lot, but also we want to see her on the other side of that process and finish it and put it in the ground, cover it in dirt, and walk away. We never get that opportunity. Once again, when we see Vi for the first time after the Season 1 time skip, she's grieving the loss of her family and unsure whether her sister is alive, let alone where she is. When we leave Vi at the end of Season 2, what we're told is the end of her story. She is once again grieving the loss of her family and presuming that Caitlyn will reveal her findings to Vi about the events in the Hex Gates, unsure if her sister is alive, let alone her whereabouts. She hasn't moved at all. And maybe the most frustrating thing about that is that it would have been so easy to integrate a satisfying end to this arc of Vi's within the show, as it's written, changing only one scene. When Vi lands on the ledge with Vander, we can very clearly see how little progress Vi has actually made as a character, because the beast that is truly no longer Vander is once again dying beside her, and she still can't bring herself to leave or do anything besides cry against his body like she did when she was a teenager. All that had to change about that scene to show any growth from Vi towards choosing to live the life she has instead of reliving a life that no longer exists is to land on the ledge with Vander's beasts, have a moment of hesitation, remembers that this is just like the night where Vander died, and despite wanting to once again relive that moment, decide to jump towards Jinx. The rest of the scene and the show can literally play out exactly the way it did, unchanged, even with Vander attacking Vi and Jinx again to prevent Vi from actually reaching the safe ledge, but we would have at least seen that Vi was willing to reach for a life in the present with her sister, which also would have made Jinx's plummet at the end more tragic, in my opinion. Ultimately, the only sort of change we do see from Vi as a character is when she was young, she wants to fight against the injustice in Zaun, if for no other reason than to give her sister a better life than the one she led. She feels so strongly about this that she's willing to fight even if it means openly opposing her father, who she very much looks up to and models herself after. But as we leave the show in Season 2, Vi hasn't fought for the betterment of Zaun. She didn't even seem interested in returning to aid Ekko in his very clear goal to continue to materially aid the people of Zaun. We end the series with Vi sitting in a house in Piltover that belongs to the enforcer she's dating. We've essentially seen her journey from an aspiring revolutionary to whatever the Runeterra version of a political moderate is. She's complacent and unwilling to upset the status quo in any direction, not because she's under the delusion that the system is perfect, but because she is currently comfortable, and an upset in any direction would upset that comfort. She's exactly like Vander in that regard, staving off the inevitable because the fragile present offers a temporary comfort, and that's just not an exciting narrative to see play out. At least Vi's connection to just continuing Vander's legacy of complacency and no actual material change ties nicely in with what Soko was talking to Jinx about with cycles. But thankfully, I have a lot of complaints for that one too. While it feels like the show legitimately balked at the idea of Vi changing in any way as a character, I don't think that's the problem with the way Jinx' story ended. Jinx does change. We actually see her change quite a few times throughout the show. It's the fact that what other people think about her and what she begins to believe about herself is never challenged in a meaningful way, and that makes her story fall flat for me. Jinx' story ended with her falling down a pit and presumably dying or escaping and telling no one to fly to a new land. Neither of these really matter. They don't affect my complaint because they ultimately have the same end result. But either way, they're done in an attempt to find the will to walk away and break the cycle, as Silco puts it. But here's the thing, Silco doesn't say it. Jinx gets this idea of breaking the cycle and finding the will to walk away from a hallucination of Silco that she's having while locked in a prison cell at the lowest point we ever see her at in the show. It's a message coming from inside of her, again, at her lowest point. So it of course makes a lot of sense when we see Jinx trying to kill herself, and it also makes sense when we see Ekko stopping her. This action of Ekko pushes back against the idea that cycles are broken by taking your own personal gear out of the machine. That serves to help no one outside of yourself. If you truly want to break cycles, you have to stay and fight to build what you want. And that's what she does. She, Ekko, and the people of Zaun swoop in and fight back. So somebody please tell me why the hallucination of a man repeating your own thoughts back to you at your lowest moments is seemingly proven the correct course of action moments later when Jinx falls down the shaft. Why did it even matter that Ekko stopped her from killing herself if she did truly always have to die in one way or another for the people she loves to be happy? And we know Jinx isn't escaping for her own happiness. She does say to the hallucination of Silco that she's tired of running in circles, but at 2 separate points, Jinx makes it very clear that she, at least in part, is leaving so Vi can lead a happy life and not be held back or hindered by her. When she leaves Vi locked in the prison cell, she says, "You're never gonna give up on me, and now you don't have to feel guilty about being happy." And later during the final fight, she says something along the lines of, "You're never gonna stop saving me," implying at both points that Jinx taking herself out of the equation would be a net good for Vi. And all that serves to prove is that the assertions that Milo was making back in episode 1 of the entire series were right. Milo used to say Powder slowed them down and held them back and was a Jinx who ruined everything. The narrative of the story doesn't ultimately push back against anything Milo asserted there. In fact, it supports it, despite the fact that the theming of the show would work much better if it did in fact challenge these thoughts. The story of Jace and Victor in Arcane culminates in an assertion that the pursuit of perfection is ultimately hollow, and that humans in particular should never endeavor to pursue perfection because our imperfections aren't what's holding us back. Our perceived imperfections are what we are, and there's both beauty and strength in the acceptance of imperfections while working with and around the quote-unquote imperfections that people will have. So, if we say Powder or Jinx does in fact slow everyone down, or that Jinx is the thing holding Vi back from whatever she feels she can attain, or even that Jinx is just a Jinx who gets everyone she cares about killed, why would we not push back against that? Why would we not be served a narrative about those perceived imperfections that goes back to how they are nothing to be ashamed of or erased? Maybe Powder did slow down the group, but maybe there's also a strength in having more people and perspectives on your side than having peak efficiency from every person you ally yourself with. Maybe Jinx, quote-unquote, holding Vi back is just a flaw in the perception of what's happening. Maybe from a different vantage point, what she's actually doing is forcing Vi to be grounded in the reality of each moment, or even forcing patience, since the lack thereof was the one repeated flaw in Vi's fighting style that was brought up multiple times during both seasons. Or, the most obvious one, in my opinion, is maybe Jinx just is a Jinx. Maybe she is putting everyone she cares about at risk by just caring about them. And maybe the people around her, Vi, Ekko, even Silco, don't mind that because it would be worth assuming that level of risk if it meant they could love her for even a moment. It's cheesy, but it would also wrap up the inner turmoil poor Jinx and Powder have had since episode 1, while also tying back to the themes Victor and Jace already established. The most baffling part about this ending to Jinx's arc is that Jace says to Victor that he and his imperfections are an inseparable piece of everything, only moments before we have another character who has been defined by her flaws, separate from everything and everyone she knows in an attempt to give them a better life. And the world doesn't fall apart. It actually moves on as it has been. The story agrees that Jinx and Vi cannot coexist happily together in any universe, and their best chances are going at it separate and apart. Not even because anything in the world dictates that it be so, just because the story itself said so. Not to mention, if Jinx truly has to die or leave to break the cycle and free her sister of her, what exactly was the point of watching any part of this show beyond the first 15 minutes of episode 1? Milo was right the whole time. Powder is a Jinx, she's a hindrance, and she's dangerous. Her sister, her city, Piltover too even, is better off without her. Not exactly the uplifting ending to the story of an anguished girl. Speaking of bummer endings, I truly believe Ekko was snubbed. Not because he didn't get the girl in the end, but because the last shot we have of him in this entire show has him sitting on a ledge overlooking the city and grieving, alone. Why? Ekko is the one character who actually didn't lose everything, I think. I can't know, because the show made that stupid tree the premise for everything Ekko, Jace, and Heimerdinger did this season. It didn't bother to wrap up the loose ends in even the simplest of ways. There could have been a scene where we, the viewers, return to the Firelight hideout after the war to see the state of it. Maybe there are a bunch of leaves ravished by the Arcane scattering the ground, and we'd look up to see if all hope is in fact lost. Instead, we see amongst the sea of bare branches a single, still green leaf clinging to life. Maybe we can push the shot in as we see children scrambling up the tree's trunk to get a closer look, and from there we can see there's actually a lot of little leaves budding from the branches, ready to fan over the firelights given time. This would of course imply that there will be a season of hardship for everyone the firelights have taken in, but all isn't lost. They will see the other side with brighter days and a green tree once more. But we didn't get that! So I'm currently under the assumption that the destruction of Hextech and the Arcane means that the tree is getting healthier again, but that's literally just a headcanon with nothing to support it in the text. But back to Ekko, we can assume that he's grieving the happier, easier life he saw that he had in the other universe. We can also assume he's grieving the fact that he can't be with Jinx in this current life, passing over the fact that that was never actually one of his goals until the third to final episode of the entire series. He's also probably grieving some close friends from both the Firelights and Zaun at large who died in the battle, especially when you take into consideration the fact that only the few Zaunites who picked up with Piltover at the beginning were outfitted with expensive armor. The rest we saw come in that second wave only had the same thing they were fighting against the Enforcers with, including handmade Molotov cocktails and little to no body protection. But there is no reason in the world Ekko, of all people, should be grieving alone. He put so much work and dedication and love, compassion into forging a space and a community that he rescued and protected. Why would our final time with Ekko not be spent with him returning to the Firelights? Why wouldn't we see them surround, comfort, and help him the way they've been helped by his initiatives? And then maybe we could pan the camera up and see that the tree's leaves are green, maybe. An implication that the tree's been saved. Third option, if you didn't like the first two, we could just have a still matte painting of the tree. No people, no context, just a picture of a tree inserted anywhere in the final scenes, just so we see if it's saved, if it's still ravished by the Arcane. Like, what's wrong with you? Just show me the fucking tree! Anyways, that's all I've got. Like I said before, there were a bunch of things that I did like in these last episodes. Savika, my favorite character, apparently getting laryngitis and not being allowed to speak for the last 7 episodes of the entire series was not amongst them. But a lot of the things that I did like were overshadowed in the immediate aftermath of finishing the show because so much of it felt lacking to me. I'm not gonna walk through my bingo card this week, I'm just gonna put it on screen, but all of the green stars are things I got right this week as opposed to the last 2 weeks, which funnily enough was more than the past 2 acts combined. I was very surprised by that. I didn't really think I was gonna get much, if anything, on this card, for this act at least. But thank you if you watched this far, and I look forward to meeting you back here for the inevitable Mel and Medarda spinoff, where I can talk about how bizarre it was that Mel and Jace didn't have a scene where they said goodbye, or good luck, or I love you. Okay, bye! It's important to me that you know that for the finale, I gave myself glow-in-the-dark Jinx nails. She didn't- oh my god.